If you watch my channel, you know there's nothing I value more in video games than engaging minute-to-minute gameplay. Regardless of genre, there's a lot of games out there with interesting stories, characters, art direction, but if I don't feel stimulated moment to moment, if AI or environmental hazards aren't keeping me on my toes, if there's no skill-based learning curve, I tend to lose interest and become bored with a game, simple as that. This is precisely why From Software's Soulsborne games are my favorite games of all time. Their combat loops are the deepest, most fun, most engaging I've ever experienced. And from Demon's Souls to Sekiro, there's fundamental mechanics and gameplay ingredients in each of these games that make them so satisfyingly addictive to play, that lend them their signature identity, and one of those key ingredients is stamina or posture management. Now, sure, stamina management does not sound very sexy, but in these games, basically everything you do, every offensive or defensive maneuver requires stamina. So stamina management becomes this minigame of sorts that's cleverly but somewhat subtly baked into every Soulsborne game. You often don't even realize you're doing it, but strategically allocating stamina second to second in high pressure moments is what makes these games so engaging. Even when you're frustrated at times, you're still engaged, perhaps even more so. Frustration does not impede engagement, in my opinion. In fact, the opposite is often true. So when From Software President Hidetaka Miyazaki told IGN in June that, yes, a stamina bar exists in Elden Ring, but that it, quote, has less influence on the player overall, end quote, with the aim of making the experience feel less restrictive and to contribute to a sense of freedom, I admittedly wasn't so sure how I felt about all of this. If you're interested, I actually dissected this interview along with Miyazaki's Famitsu interview in a nearly 40-minute video that I posted to my channel in early July. But in short, look, I trust Miyazaki, I trust From Software's best-in-class track record when it comes to game design, but there's always been that tiny voice in the back of my head asking, what if I don't love Elden Ring's open world design? What if the combat feels too easy or approachable or something like that? Now, I don't really believe or expect these things, but that shred of anxious doubt is there. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. Because I don't care for most open world games. I find them to be big, boring, and empty. I hate fetch quests. I hate constantly being forced to talk to NPCs and watch overlong cutscenes. Basically, I hate hand-holding. And that extends to combat or environmental hazards as well. If I feel like I can just carelessly waltz through a game, I lose interest pretty quickly. Whether I'm playing a racing simulator like WRC9, or a platformer like Crash Bandicoot 4, or an FPS game like Doom Eternal, I want to be challenged. And the games I just mentioned, some of my personal favorites, all have ways of keeping you honest and challenging you, and that's definitely true when it comes to Soulsborne. But imagine for a moment if Sekiro lacked a posture meter, or if Bloodborne lacked a stamina meter. How much fun would those games still be? How long could you play them? How long could you just slash and shoot your way through everything and everyone like an unchecked god until you became bored and lost interest? Until you realized, hey, that empathetic connection with my player character who's fighting and struggling his or her way through this grim world, that no longer exists. So that's why this talk of Elden Ring stamina bar made me nervous despite my confidence in FromSoft. But thankfully, a knight in shining armor has come to my emotional rescue in the form of Yasuhiro Kitao. Kitao oversees PR and marketing for FromSoft, and in recent years has appeared to have become a sort of confidant or sounding board or right hand to Miyazaki himself. This shocked shot of the two of them at the 2019 Game Awards, taken the moment Sekiro was announced as Game of the Year, is so wholesome and prime meme template material. I've always liked Kitao, unlike the flat-brimmed, hat-wearing dude bro community managers for many Western studios. Kitao is refreshingly mysterious, as is everyone who works at FromSoft, and I can't help but imagine everything he must know, all the things he's seen and heard behind the scenes, all the deep art and design-related conversations he's had with Miyazaki. He's also always struck me as a bit of a human encyclopedia when it comes to From Software, the studio's history, and all the nitty-gritty elements that define Soulsborne games. And as many of you likely know, FromSoft recently released a few new screenshots from Elden Ring, all of which are sick, and they also gave a secretive demo or preview of the game to a number of content creators and media outlets. And as part of these marketing maneuvers, Kitao granted an interview to Ungeek, a Philippines-based gaming blog and website, an Asian platform I'd honestly never heard of before. But in an August 27th published interview on Ungeek, Kitao shared some interesting new details about Elden Ring. These include FromSoft's aim to somewhat nerf and balance the power of magic, the fact that summonable spirits will be dependent on your magic or focus points, that these sites of lost grace do appear to function like bonfires, that you can actually regain health by dispatching small groups of enemies, that they are considering ways in which to utilize the haptic feedback of the PS5's DualSense controller, that despite the scale of the game world, FromSoft has been focused on filling it with those handcrafted, vertically oriented, multi-layered dungeons we've come to know and love. And despite George R.R. Martin's involvement, this is not a story-driven game, and the combat and exploration gameplay is front and center. So that's a lot of good stuff, and if you're interested, I've included a link to the full interview in the description of this video. And sure, I could spend all day yammering and speculating about the details Kitao divulged in this interview, but I really want to home in on his remarks about stamina, which truly eased my previous concerns and clarified my understanding of what FromSoft is going for in this game. So here's the relevant Ungeek quotes. First, Kitao is asked about Elden Ring's speed, and you might know I love the faster pace of the last three From Software games. And this is what Kitao says on the topic. Quote, "We'd say the sense of speed of combat is closer to Dark Souls 3. If you remember, we had Dark Souls 1 and 2 released with the more steady, deliberate combat speed. Then Bloodborne came out, which really kind of changed that and added a lot more speed and aggression. We saw that the fans really responded well to that, so we wanted to incorporate a bit of that speed into Dark Souls 3, and that was met quite well. So we've used that as a base, sort of as a starting point for Elden Ring." End quote. And then Ungeek asks Kitao if this means we can expect stamina to function somewhat like it does in DS3, and here's his answer. Quote, "Yes, you can expect stamina to work in a similar way to how it did in Dark Souls 3, except in the overworld. As we want to alleviate the stress of traversing the huge overworld, stamina management only comes into play during combat and within dungeons. So when you're out roaming the lands between and you're not in combat, you can hold down the sprint button indefinitely without consuming stamina. We wanted to give the player a stress-free experience as much as we could." End quote. So there you have it. In Elden Ring, stamina is only in effect during combat, which makes sense. Think about Sekiro. You can run freely around Ashina Castle, sprinting, jumping, grappling, and only when you engage enemies do you have to consider your posture. Whereas in every previous game, your stamina factors into running and exploration. Speedrunners especially know this. Sprinting in the Souls games or in Bloodborne is kind of like pushing down on a gas pedal and then letting off, and then pushing down and then letting off. It's not a problem as far as those games are concerned, but the freedom of movement in Sekiro is a key part of why it feels so good to play, and this doesn't adversely impact combat at all. In fact, you could argue that Sekiro is combat-wise the most challenging and sophisticated From Software game to date. And this was honestly my hope for Elden Ring, a game game that somewhat resembled Demon Souls or Dark Souls 3, but benefited from the innovations of Sekiro, a Souls game in a post-Sekiro world. This isn't totally dissimilar from the effect Bloodborne had on DS3. DS3 is likely my favorite Soulsborne game, but I always say that it does stand on Bloodborne's shoulders. In 2015, Bloodborne was a breath of fresh air. After 3 consecutive Souls games, the last 2 being more slowly paced than the first, playing Bloodborne felt like driving a Ferrari, 0 to 100. Suddenly everything was super fast. The enemies, the player character, the attack animations, the boss AI was more advanced than ever before. So when Miyazaki and the team returned to Dark Souls with DS3, the combat was much faster and refined than in previous titles. That meant the attacking, the omnidirectional dodging, tons of complex and aggressive bosses. Some of Bloodborne's DNA is definitely in DS3. You can feel it, and I always loved that about the game. I think people sleep on some of the rings in DS3 as well. The Ring of the Evil Eye, Pontiff's right and left eye rings, Aldrich's ruby. These rings all somewhat emulate Bloodborne's rally mechanic, incentivizing you to be aggressive and to attack in order to heal. But Kitao touches on all of this in his comments, that idea of Bloodborne being a watershed game for the studio, and then DS3 being the most Bloodborne-like Souls game in terms of its speed and movement, let's say. And he touches on FromSoft wanting to continue with that kind of gameplay, but with some new elements from Sekiro as well. FromSoft is responding and leaning into the community's interest in fast-paced gameplay, while also being objectively self-reflective. When it comes to combat, in my opinion, it feels like FromSoft just keeps outdoing itself with each successive game. I love that they want to continue pushing those limits and combining elements from various games. I've been thinking a lot about these shots in the June gameplay trailer in which the tarnished player character intentionally blocks or absorbs oncoming attacks, not with a shield but with his sword. I thought that was very interesting. You can do that in previous Souls games, but obviously depending on the enemy you're facing and the power of the oncoming attack, it can be a pretty bad idea. However, we see just that in the gameplay trailer, and you know From Software wouldn't show us the wrong way to play. In an official trailer like this, you know this footage is meant to encourage and invite us to emulate this playstyle, combining dodges with light and heavy attacks, weapon arts, and these Sekiro-style sword blocks. Again, Elden Ring really feels like a marriage between DS3 and Sekiro, and I'm all about it. So I'm much less nervous now, if at all, and honestly just excited, just looking forward to the possibilities. I love playing a lean, quick, shieldless dexterity build in Souls games, so I know I'll be very interested in trying to build my character and play in such a way that I feel just as fast in tight combat moments as I do when I'm sprinting around the open world. I know I'll enjoy attempting to create a sense of cohesiveness there. And speedrunning too, as a speedrunner myself, I cannot wait to see the ways in which other runners try to break this game and then try my hand at doing so as well. Being able to sprint endlessly around the open fields in addition to having an instantly summonable mount, man, I suspect this game is going to feel fast. I just hope the frame rate doesn't suffer. There's going to be a lot of perpetually loading assets, a lot of rapid animations. My fingers are tightly crossed for Elden Ring delivering a solid 60 frames per second and a sharp resolution, hopefully something north of 1080p. I'd even take a dynamic 1200p and 1400p. That would be a dream. I don't know, Ghost of Tsushima is a big open world game that's now pushing a checkerboarded 2160p at 60 FPS on PS5, so maybe I'm underestimating what's possible. Unstable frame rates once plagued FromSoft's games, but in recent years they've done a nice job cleaning things up with patches and remasters, for the most part. But hey, I'm getting off topic. Fast, speed-running dex builds aside, this is From Software. I'm sure if you want to exclusively level strength, wield an obnoxiously and hilariously huge Havel or Smo-style hammer, and plot around the lands between smashing and bonking everything in sight, you'll be able to do that too. That's the beauty of these games. But in closing, thank you Yasuhiro Kitao. I can sleep like a baby now. I do feel like my only concerns about this game's concept, the open map and possible lack of designed dungeons and lack of stamina influence, those fears have all been quelled. And I don't know how much more we'll see before January. Kitao did make it sound like the team is still very much at work on the game. He didn't want to definitively comment on a couple topics like frame rate and resolution, so I hope the game isn't delayed. It could be, I'll accept that if it happens. I obviously want a polished, finished product, and January 2022 was at least 2 months sooner than I ever expected we'd get the game, but will we see anything else at Tokyo Game Show, the Game Awards? I don't know, but I had to make a video and share my thoughts about this topic because in my mind, this is not insignificant. This is what these games are all about, stamina and combat speed. So tell me what you think. Is this good news as far as you're concerned? Are you similarly excited about what these details could mean for Elden Ring's combat? Or do you have some lingering fears or concerns or question marks like I did? I look forward to hearing your thoughts, and remember you can find me on Twitter at TerrapopTweets, Instagram at TerrapopGram, Discord at Terrapop's Treehouse, and on Patreon at patreon.com/Terrapop, where I offer all kinds of cool tiers and perks for my patrons. All those links are down in the description. Thank you as always for watching, and if you're new to the channel, I have all kinds of Soulsborne and Elden Ring related content and video essays that you can go check out. So be well everyone, and I'll catch you next time.